Hello, this video is long overdue. So generally when I teach theories in counseling or as some institutions call psychotherapeutic systems, I teach them in waves, describing the first wave as the psychodynamic wave with all the Freud and the neo-Freudians. Then we go into action-oriented, which is the behaviorism, the cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and I think that is where we add dialectical behavioral therapy, but that's a newer version. And then we dive into the third wave, which is the humanistic. And this is where we do person-centered gestalt. Um, what's the third one? The one that has Viktor Frankl, existential psychotherapy. So those three I classify as traditional schools of psychotherapeutic systems. Then we come to the postmodern wave, which is solution focused, brief therapy, then narrative therapy, then family systems. Some people will classify feminist theory as all those social justice theories are part of what we call the fourth wave or the postmodern approaches. So normally when I'm teaching the postmodern approaches, solution focus is the first one that we talk about. So come on this journey with me and let's see what we can learn together. Since probably 2020, when I did the first one, I've gained some new insights. And so the way I'm teaching it is a bit different. So solution focused brief therapy emerged in the 1980s. So, according to me, it's not too old. And it emerged as a new way of thinking about change in therapy. So, rather than focusing on problems or past causes, so problems is more psychodynamic and all is schools. This one focused on building or emphasize building what is already working and helping the clients to imagine their preferred future. This approach was developed at the Brief Family Therapy Center in Milwaukee, where therapists carefully studied what actually helped clients. And their work was inspired by thinkers like Milton Erickson and Gregory Bateson, and led by pioneers like Insoo Kimberg and Steve DeShitzer. So that's Insoo Kimberg, that's Steve DeShitzer, and they stood on the shoulders of Milton Erickson and Gregory Bateson. So interestingly, Insoo Kimberg and Steve DeShitzer married and they formed the Therapy Brief Family Training Center, where they did a lot of experimentation with families and couples using this idea of what is working and how can we enhance more of what is working instead of focusing what does not work. Okay. Now, let's see what it means. So, solution focused brief therapy is a therapy grounded on a positive orientation that people are healthy and competent. Remember, every theory, as I've said before, focuses on a unique thing, either because of what was pertaining in that era or the experiences of the therapist or what they kept seeing in clients. And so the lens that solution focused brief therapists use was that people really are healthy and competent, and it shares similarities with positive psychology. So it makes sense that they have a positive orientation. The past is downplayed. Pay attention, it's downplayed. It doesn't mean that it does not come in at all. It's just downplayed while the present and future are highlighted. And therapy is concerned with looking for what is working instead of just harping on what doesn't work, what doesn't work. And so what therapists do is to help clients find exceptions to their problems. So for example, we'll go through the techniques, but when we are sitting with clients, we are looking at, they say they had this and this and this. In their story, are we hearing of instances where that problem was not a problem? Okay. And then because of that, there's a shift from problem orientation to solution focus. And there's an emphasis on constructing solutions rather than just doing problem solving. It's also based on the principles of social constructionist philosophies and doesn't emphasize individuals' personality as a proper unit of psychotherapy. So this therapeutic approach really is helpful for clients from very family-oriented backgrounds, or what's the opposite of individualistic approach? So collectivist environment. So they do not challenge either the existence or etiology of problems. They know problems are there, but then how can we come alongside the client to look for solutions to help them? Okay. So we have some basic assumptions for solution-focused brief therapy. It is a mouthful, so I'll probably say SFBT. And they say the problem itself may not be relevant to finding effective solutions. And as we talk more about this, you'll get to understand what I mean by this, okay? Um, People can create their own solutions in the appropriate environment, and small changes do lead to large changes. This, there's the assumption also that the client is the expert on his or her own life, and the best therapy involves a collaborative partnership between the client and the therapist. A therapist not knowing. So we approach clients with this whole, I don't know your life. You are an expert. Okay. So because of that, it affords the client an opportunity to construct a solution. So I don't come to the client as if I'm the expert and I know I may have expertise in my area of practice, but the client is the expert of their own life. And so if you come alongside with them with that sense of humility, you stand a better chance at helping the client co-construct solutions to help them. Okay. How do SFBT therapists see human nature? So SFBT counseling has a very positive social constructivist view of human nature. It sees people as basically healthy and competent enough to deal with their lives, which means that if you approach a client with the lens of psychodynamic, you are bound not to see clients as healthy and competent. Again, every theoretical school has its lens. This one says, my clients are healthy and competent to deal with life. They construct their reality based on our social interactions with others. It's a bit like Adlerian. So they see a human being as part of a community. And people are viewed as the expert on the solutions to their problems. Again, as we talk more on this, you get to know why they have those philosophies. So what are the key concepts of SFBT? They believe that helping is solution building rather than problem solving. So you realize I'll keep saying similar things, but in different ways. So by the time we are done with this, you'll get to really understand it. There's an emphasis on mental health rather than pathology, or rather than mental illness. They believe in simplicity and parsimony. So just stick straight to the point and go on instead of all the flowery things that God knows we are known for on this side of the world. They focus on discovering solutions. And so we don't focus so much of the problem. So there's problem-free talk. And the therapist comes to the table believing that change is inevitable. And then problems change. And the present and future are what we are focusing on and not necessarily the past. And they believe in, hey, let's work with what works. Okay. My friends in the United States will say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they also believe that big problems may just require small changes. So, for example, an SFBT therapist will say, what would help to move you from 2 to 2.3 or 2.5 instead of, oh, what would move you from 2 to 10? No, they believe in small changes that help with big problems. Now, they believe that they don't really believe in this whole personality thing, but then even if you pin them down to talk, they'll say, hey, you know what? We can never know the real causes of clients' problems, whether it's from birth or from something that happened in childhood or from something that's biological, or we can never really tell. And the best we can do is to construct different interpretations of their problems. The therapist's interpretation of a client's problems may be no better than that of the client. And that's why they believe in that whole co-constructing thing, coming alongside us. I don't know your life, but you are the expert of it. Okay. There's the underlying premise of solution focus, an underlying premise of solution focused therapy is that the client is considered the expert on his or her problem. For God's sake, they have been living with it for a while. So they should know it better than anybody else. I have a feeling I'll come back to this again. Let's see. These are the five basic processes of solution focused brief therapy. Let's see if I can do this. The therapeutic process is done in five stages. The first one is to describe the problem, then develop well-formed goals, explore for exceptions, end of session feedback, and evaluate the client's progress. Let's use a client for an example to make it easy for you to understand. Okay. So let's assume our client is Joseph. Joseph is 28 years old. He finished tech and he did Akito. So he's a junior architect and he's recently started experiencing anxiety at work, especially around presenting ideas in team meetings, whether it's online or face to face. He feels like his voice doesn't matter. Because he's young, nobody really cares what he says. And he often freezes when he has asked to contribute. So his supervisor gently suggested that he needs to talk to someone because it's starting to affect his confidence and performance. And Joseph does agree that something needs to change, but he feels unsure about where to start. So he comes to you, a solution focused brief therapist. Now let's walk Joseph through the five stages, okay? So describing the problem, the goal is to understand how the client views the issue without going too deep into pathology or the past. So we can start with something like, hey, Joseph, can you tell me a bit about what brings you here today? And then Joseph can say, I really get nervous during team meetings. My heart races and I freeze. And I just want to be able to speak up without panicking. So that's the process of describing the problem. And then in the second stage, where we develop well-formed goals, we help Joseph imagine his preferred future. So what would life look like if things got better? Okay, so this is where a therapist might use one of the techniques, and we'll talk about that as we go on. So therapists might ask a miracle question. So to suppose tonight while you're sleeping, a miracle happens and this anxiety is gone. What would be the first small thing you'd notice in the morning that tells you something changed? And so we expect Joseph to say something like, I think I'll walk into the office feeling a little calmer, and maybe I'd raise my hand during the meeting without overthinking. You realize SFBT believes in small, small, small changes. Okay. In the third stage, we explore for exceptions. So the goal is to identify times when Joseph has handled similar situations better or even slightly. So as a therapist, you may come in and say something like, has there been a time when you felt even a little more confident in a meeting or presentation? And Joseph might say, yes, once I prepared a visual and felt good explaining it because I knew it inside out. Then we go to the fourth one, which is the end of session feedback. And the goal of this is to complement Joseph's strengths, summarize what's working, and possibly offer, again, a small task. So you can say, it sounds like you're already someone who prepares thoroughly. Remember, you don't say, oh, you are good. What is he good in? So SFBT focuses on on specific things to compliment clients on. So in Joseph's case, we are saying you appear to be somebody who prepares thoroughly, and that has helped you in the past. And then we go on in this stage, providing that end of session feedback. So we can say something like, between now and our next meeting, could you pay attention to even the smallest moments where you feel more in control or confident at work? So that's homework, but it's allowing Joseph to really feel like he can get something done. And then the final one is to evaluate client progress. And so the goal is to use scaling or narrative feedback to measure how far Joseph has come. So you might say something like, hey, on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is I'm still freezing up all the time, and 10 is I'm speaking confidently in meetings, where would you place yourself today? And Joseph might say, maybe a 4. Last week, I actually shared a suggestion in a smaller group. So you see how these things can work in real life situations working with clients. Now, what is the role of the therapist, and possibly what's the role of a client in an SFBT relationship? So the clinician does not accept the role of the expert, so you are not. The basic relational strategy is to promote the client's own self-healing and self-corrective powers, because again, the lens we are wearing is that the client has what it takes to take care of the problems. And solution-focused therapist is a consultant. And your major task is to learn about the unique ways that an individual or a family has conceptualized complaints. So what about the client? What is the role that we want for the we know the clients should have? So we declare that clients can construct their own solutions or problems. And you, the therapist, you are not an expert to scientifically assess the client's problems and intervene. And because the therapist is using the client's frame of reference, it becomes less useful to concentrate on resistance. So when this client is, no, the client is the expert. They are wired to have solutions to their problem. All you are doing is coming alongside them to help. Goals in SFBT are stated in the positive language using the client's language or client's own words. It's process or action oriented. It's structured in the here and now. And I know you've heard of this in Gestalt. It's stated in something that's attainable, that's concrete, and that's specific, and is controlled or presented by the client. So the therapist does just working alongside. Listen, you are not the expert. The client is not something that's broken for you to fix. Okay. So if you have the mentality of I need to fix the client, this is not the theory for you. Now we have some techniques that are unique to solution-focused brief therapy. For example, miracle question. And it's a technique that invites the client to imagine how life would be different if a miracle happened overnight and their problems were solved. You remember the technique we used with Joseph, okay? So the purpose is to help the clients visualize goals and preferred futures. So that alone makes a client feel like I can achieve it. And an example is to say, hey, suppose tonight while you are asleep, there's a very scripted way of saying it. So you can't just get up and say it. You have to learn the script. So suppose tonight while you are asleep, a miracle happens and the problem is gone. How would you know? What will be different? Now, the second technique is looking for previous solutions. This is where you explore past times when the problem was either absent or less intense. And the purpose is to build on the client's strengths and existing resources. So the question you ask when you're using this technique is, has there ever been a time when the issue didn't bother you as much? What was different then? Compliments. This is genuine, specific acknowledgement of the client's strengths, efforts, or progress. I'm going to say that again. Genuine, specific acknowledgement of the client's strength, efforts, or progress. The purpose is to reinforce positive behavior and promote self-efficacy. So an example, like what we used with Joseph, is that shows a lot of courage to keep going despite all that. So you realize you are not complimenting the client's appearance or their personality or anything. You are complimenting genuinely their strength, their effort, or their progress. And you get to know this only after you have been in tune and listen therapeutically to what the client has been telling you. Okay. The next one is exceptions. Exceptions identify times when the problem could have occurred but didn't. So it highlights what works, even if only a little. So, for example, tell me about a time recently when things went even slightly better. What did you do differently? What about scaling questions? It uses a 0 to 10 scale to measure things like progress, confidence, motivation, or severity. And the purpose is to make abstract feelings more concrete and measurable. So we'll say something like on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is the worst and 10 is exactly how you want things to be. Where are you today? Another technique is normalizing. Normalizing helps clients feel less alone or in quotes, or abnormal, and abnormal is in quotes, in their struggles. Because there are times uh environment makes us feel like the things the things that are happening in our lives mean there's something wrong with us. So this technique helps a client to feel like, you know what, you are not alone. And the purpose is to reduce shame and promote perspective. Please remember that this is not the same as self-disclosure, okay? So you can say something like, many people feel overwhelmed in situations like this. You are not alone. We are very particular about what to say so it doesn't move the focus from the client to ourselves. Because if you don't use these techniques well, it ends up becoming about you, the therapist, and that's not therapeutically appropriate, nor is it healing. We also have some techniques that I haven't put here. For example, coping questions. Coping questions focus on how the client is managing despite challenges. And so the purpose of this is to reinforce resilience and survival skills. We can ask questions like, how have you been managing to get through this, even just a little bit? You realize that you are looking at just the positive aspect of everything. There's another one we call consultation break and invitation to add more. So this is where the therapist briefly steps out or pretends to step out and returns to share feedback or ask if the client wants to add anything. Okay. And the purpose is to provide a reflective pause and give the client more control, especially when it becomes too intense. So, for example, I'll say something like, I'm going to step out for a moment and think about what we've discussed. Before I do, is there anything else you think I should know? And then you step out briefly and come back. It allows some level of de-escalation, allows the client to feel less of the intensity and think, and for you to also go back and get perspective. But it doesn't mean you go for 30 minutes out of the client's 50 minutes, okay? All right. Returning the focus to the client is also another technique. This is where the therapist gently redirects the session back to the client's strengths, goals, or agency. The purpose is to keep the session goal-directed and client-led. I can say something like, that's important. How do you want to handle this moving forward? So you are not the one looking for solutions, but you're giving the power to the client. Another technique is called noticing. Noticing is encouraging clients to observe and reflect on small positive changes or successes. And the purpose is to build awareness and reinforce progress. So, for example, I can say, between now and our next session, could you notice even small signs that things are moving in the right direction? Have you heard this before? Yeah, we use that with the Joseph example. All right. Now, solution focus is interesting in the way that it does some assessment of the type of clients that are coming in. So when you are doing your clinical notes, you will sometimes say, oh, the client is a complainant, or the client exhibited a complainant relationship, or the client exhibited visitor relationship, or what does that even mean? So when you have a customer type client, or the client exhibits customer type relationship, what it means is the client wants change and is ready to work towards it. So, for example, Amma comes into therapy saying, I've been feeling anxious at work and I really want to learn how to manage it better. This is a client who is open to trying out suggestions, notices progress, and actively participates in creating solutions. Now, what if the client is a complainant type? This is the person who recognizes a problem but believes that someone else needs to change. So Kwame comes in saying, my wife is always nagging me about not helping with the kids. She's the one who needs to stop complaining. Kwame sees the issues clearly, but he's focused on what others are doing wrong rather than what he can do. And then for visitor type relationship, this client doesn't see the problem and is usually attending because someone else sent them. So AC shows up saying, I don't really know why I'm here. My boss just says I should talk to someone. AC doesn't feel anything needs fixing and isn't currently looking for change. And so if you know the type of relationship your client is coming in, it makes it relatively easier to know how to help the client get better or get the solution they are looking for. Okay, I think we've talked about the therapist role and the client role. Now let's explore some myths, some common solution-based therapy myths that people have about this theory. Okay, so facts. Solution-focused based therapists do not suggest logical solutions to clients because the myth is that they propose solutions. Okay, so they don't. What they do is clients identify solutions with the help of the therapist. Therapist identifies exceptions to the problems, descriptions of what is already working, client resources to help that resources that are available to help the client envision potential solutions. And once a clear behavioral goal is identified, the therapist works with the client to take small steps. Okay. All right. Another myth is solution-focused therapists never talk about problems. The fact is, solution-focused therapists, like all therapists, must spend some time talking about the problem. They just spend less time talking about the problem than many other therapists. They typically follow clients' lead in determining how much and how often they need to talk about their problem versus the solution. Okay, so this is where they use unique techniques like exception questions, because exceptions really talk about the problem as part of identifying the solution. Another myth, solution-focused therapists never talk about the past. The fact is, they actually have numerous techniques that are grounded in talking about the past. However, when they talk about the past, they focus on the strength as well as the problem. Because if you don't talk about the past, how do you know what has worked and what hasn't worked? Okay. Another myth, emotions are not discussed. Fact, emotions cannot be avoided in any therapy. Solution-based therapists do not view expression of emotion as curative in and of itself, as in humanistic therapies like Gestalt. Okay, so emotions are used as clues to what works and what does not, and where the client wants to go. All right. So, what are the contributions of SFBT? Therapy is brief, maybe less expensive. There's a clear establishment of goals early on in career. It can be used for diverse views. Clients are encouraged to use their own cultural framework, and it's a very honoring theory. Now, what about limitations? It has a tendency of overlooking gender and power differentials depending on the culture. And it neglects client history and broader assessments. Okay. Therapists might inform clients that they have expertise in conducting therapy. However, they will work collaboratively towards clients. And for some clients, they feel like, wait, I'm coming to a therapist. They are supposed to know everything to help me. But if you are saying that I'm not the expert of your problem, some people misconstrue that and think it means that the therapist doesn't know what they are talking about, but that is not it. So this is the contribution that we had from solution-focused brief therapy, and we can thank the elders who came up with these because it gives us ready-to-use tools in working with clients. Feel free to pose any questions you may have, and then let's study together, okay? All right, bye.